Hello, my friends. Welcome back to our channel. Today, we are going to look at some senior cutouts, but we're also going to talk about what to do when you use a thinner cardstock like this gold one that is one of my favorites, this Mary Spot Girl, and that's a little bit thinner and it will curl on you. I've gotten a couple questions since our HTV video about that, and I do experience that as well, especially with this gold one. For example, you can kind of see here that this one's curled in comparison to one that I put an extra layer on. But I still like this look and I want the gold to be the back part. So I'll show you what I do with that. If you're here just for senior cutouts, don't worry. I'm going to do a brief Cricut design space, but I'm not going to go through designing these cutouts because they were already designed, if I'm being honest with you. But the cool thing is when I checked the file, they were all either Cricut or Cricut Access. So I will be able to share this file. If you don't have an Access membership, you can purchase any of the pieces that you need from this individually pretty cost effectively. If you are a homecoming business owner, I would highly suggest you look at Cricut Access. It does, I use it all the time, all year round. And I will put a link down below for Cricut Access as well. So let's get started looking at this. We'll walk through that and then I'll give you kind of some tips and pointers on how I use this gold, because I mentioned in my HTV I do gold a little bit differently, and it is solely for the purpose, the reason it's different is the materials I use. So I'm hoping that all of this, basically this video will give you some ideas on how you can play with your material and change it, because I still think that even having to do this extra step sometimes when it curls, it is still so much easier to use HTV. And another reason is some of these really intricate things you couldn't do with cardstock. So let's move into Cricut Design Space, and then I'll quickly give you some weeding tips for these particular ones, and then I'll show you that extra step that we do. It doesn't take very long at all. Let's get started. Okay, so here are our three cutouts. As I said, they're already designed. I kind of pieced them together from different pieces, but they are all Cricut, so you'll be able to use them. But what I'm going to do is let's go over here and look at this grouping. It has 3 layers, and we're going to go to that very last offset, and then let's right click on there, and we're going to duplicate it, because what we're going to do is for the gold ones, you do not have to do this for the silver ones, or at least I do not, because I use a thicker cardstock for the silver. But for that thinner gold cardstock that I know tends to curl on me, I'm going to go in each one of these and I'm going to duplicate that last layer, because what we're going to do is we're going to put a thinner piece of cardstock on there. I actually use the same cardstock that I buy in bulk for our skirt, because it ends up being like 7 cents a sheet. It is 8.5 inches, and I prefer to deal with 12 by 12, but I just choose to do it that way for the cost perspective of it. But what I'm going to do is real quick before we make it, I'm going to change these. I just for some reason default to pink, and that way we'll be able to cut those on a different material. So now we're ready to go ahead and hit make it, and Cricut will put it on all the different mats for us. So I am going to make, as you could see, I made a bulk set. So I'm going to make 4 of each. Of course, you can kind of skip this step if you're just making one. Just make sure that you mirror your white HTV and your gold HTV, or whatever colors you're using. Make sure you mirror your top two. What I'm doing here, and I talked about this in probably almost all of my Cricut design space, is I am going to move as many things as I can to one sheet, but I do like to mirror it before I do that. I've just found for some reason, if you get them all placed and then you mirror it afterwards, the Cricut will sometimes change the spacing. And sometimes I move and get mine so close that then it'll mess up that spacing. So I'm moving this first page, and then I'll go over to the second page, and I'm sure you've seen me do it before. I'm just going to move everything kind of to the bottom here, because I know that that's what's open on my other sheet, and I don't, Cricut basically moves it when you tell it to move object. It's going to move it to the exact same place on that sheet as where you had it on your previous. And if I had put it there in the top left hand corner, then I'd have to move things all around. So let's see if I can figure out how to get all 12 of these onto one sheet. Sometimes I have to kind of play around with it a little bit. It may be better to move that one up there and then move this one. Yeah, that will work. I'll be able to get all 3. I should be able to. Let's see if I can get them, have to move them over. Sometimes I have to really play with it. And I know that that takes time. I may have to switch those two. I know that that takes time, but for me, it saves on my material. Not only does it save on my material, because you can see there's very less waste, but that's less cuts I have to do through my machine. So it's just preference, but I would rather do this than have to put 2 sheets through my machine and have a whole bunch of scraps, because if you've seen my crafting video, you know that I have tons of scraps anyway. So I try to make sure that I can have as little scraps as possible. So now I think I've finally got that white configured. What we're going to have to do for the next 2 layers is that gold that I purchased is actually 8.5. And so we are going to have to change that first in the Cricut design space. But first, before I do that, let's go down here and go ahead. This is going to be my top layer, the most intricate layer. And let's go ahead and mirror those as well and see if I can get those. I'm just going to do the exact same process. I'm going to continue to tighten those grad caps. I know I like to make those in bulk because you can flip them and push them really close together. And it really does save on your materials. And then let's see, I have a feeling it would be better if I move that senior up there, because it is going to, I guess, take advantage of the most of that opening. And then I should be able to move everything else that's on those bottom, that extra sheet here on the bottom. I think there's only one. Yeah, that'll be great. It should work out. Again, I'm going to move it down to that bottom right hand corner. So when I move it over there, I'm not having to mess with any of the other pieces. And it's nice when you move it onto a mat that's already mirrored. Cricut is going to go ahead and mirror that as well. So everything is mirrored. I always kind of like to do a double check just to make sure nothing is crossing over on each other, but everything looks good. So now let's move back to our 8.5 by 11 and we will work on those 2 sheets. Okay, now we've moved back to our 8.5 by 11 sheets. And so I changed the material size, and I'm just going to walk through the basic same process and kind of flip things around and move them so that I can have less waste material. You know, I will say that Announcement Converters does have a 12 by 12 Miri Gold Sparkle. I've done the calculations, and the cost per inch is just so much more that I'm just willing to do it with the 8.5 by 11. And the same kind of goes with that white cardstock. While I'm doing this, I also wanted to give you another option for duplication. And it's one that I use a lot of times when I'm doing things bulk, but I wanted to show you this way because some people like to visually see all their different layers in different colors. But because that pink layer is going to be the exact same as your gold cardstock layer, instead of having a pink layer and a gold layer, and as you see, I'm going to have to go through and move everything over on that pink in the exact same format, you could leave that one off and you could cut all of your material as you normally would on your Cricut machine, leave your project open, and then recut the gold. Don't go all the way back to your project because it won't keep all of everything that you've moved around. But once you've cut everything completely, then you can just kind of check back in if you can see how it's white instead of gray. Cricut's going to cut whatever is in that white area. So if you don't want to duplicate, you can just go ahead and recut that again, just on a different material. So I just wanted to let you know that because I do that a lot in bulk. So I'm not going to go through walking through the pink. You're going to do it the exact same way. But then once we go to make it, make sure that you choose whatever pressure. For me, it's going to be more pressure. For my machines, that's just what I found has been good for me. Okay, I'll show you again that this glitter Mary Sparkle, although I love the color, it is thinner. While my Cricut machine is cutting all those detailed HTV ones that'll take a little bit longer, I'm going to go ahead and prepare my mats. I talked about it in that how I use glitter cardstock with my Cricut video. That my friend from Cousin Mum Design showed me this trick several years ago, and I use it all the time. I use old glitter cardstock, glitter cardstock. I use old cutting mat that I only use for glitter cardstock, and I just apply a little bit of painter's tape and then use a brayer to secure it. I talk about it in more detail in that video, how for this one, I'm going to use every single piece of this sheet. But let's say I was just cutting one thing. I would actually leave the glitter cardstock on there and then go back to it and use it again, just moving around things in design space. I don't know. It's just preference for me. I can't stand taking glitter cardstock on and off the mat. And the other thing that I found is if I won't put glitter cardstock on a mat ever that I use with HTV only, that particular mat will last 3 times as long. So for me, this just is also a saving on my mat, but it also just allows me not to have to take it on and off. So that's all I'm doing here is I'm just using a little bit of painter's tape and my brayer, and I'm doing all of those sheets so that then when it's time to cut, I will be prepared and ready. And that's another thing I love about it is, can you see there, this one, believe it or not, that's a little bit of boa. Does anybody else have boa residue all over their craft room from making homecoming mums? Or is it just me? But even with that boa residue on there, it's fine to just use this. And I don't hardly ever throw away a Cricut mat. I just kind of save them and use them for that. So let me finish getting these prepared and then we'll get those cut. And then I'll give you a few weeding tips for these particular designs. Okay, I've already weeded that middle layer. There's really nothing much to it, but I want to show you on this Gold Mary Sparkle. Although it's kind of finicky on the heat press, or it can be a little bit because it's a thinner material, it does weed pretty easy. So I'll just pull this quick first layer off real quick for you, just so you can kind of see those grad caps. I love that a lot of those lines just automatically pull out for you. And then let's just look more specifically at things to watch for. Like on that grad cap, if any of your lines don't pull through, just kind of go and try to find one of the lines and pull, and it will, especially if you use your hands, it will kind of bring the rest of the lines where you can grab them. There's always the 2 lines around the top of the hat, and then there's 2 little lines right here, and those usually don't pull out, and you have to grab those. So that's kind of that on that. And then when it comes to seeing, well, right here, you see sometimes it doesn't grab. And this is where I'm putting all of my trash in my little trash can. And then I have this new little hand finger that I'm really loving, but you'll see probably in the video that it is not second nature to me yet. So just be patient with me on that. When it comes to the senior year HOCO, I'm really first just kind of going through there and weeding and getting all of the big pieces. You'll probably see that when I weed, I'm a little ADD with my weeding too. I just kind of weed what I see and then move on. But the big thing with the senior HOCO is just to make sure, of course, that you get that little dot in the eye, and then always kind of check the grad cap and that little piece on the Y. And then remember on the HOCO that you actually want to weed out the inside of it and keep the outside layer of it. And then the last thing is on the senior, each one of these is going to have a little piece that you can weed out. If you don't want to weed that out, you can go in your design space project, open up that particular section and contour those pieces out, and it would be a solid senior. I just think it adds a little bit of effect. And then when it comes to the other senior 2025, it's pretty self-explanatory. You're just basically got to make sure that you grab the E, and all of those little bitty pieces. And then the same thing on that 2025 is we're actually going to weed out the inside, which means we weed out the little part of the 0 and then weed out the rest of it. So that's kind of just the tip. You'll see that for some reason that little piece was just determined not to go in the trash can. I'm using my HTV rod since I'm making these in bulk, but any heat press would work. I do highly recommend this heat press tape dispenser. It really saved me lots of time last season. So we're just going to go through and put that middle layer onto the cardstock. So I will tell you, for both my Gold Mirror Sparkle cardstock and my Gold Shimmer, I do 285 at 20 degrees. I've just found that both the cardstock and the HTV handles it a little bit better. The other thing I try to do for both of those is to use my cooling block immediately afterwards to cool it down as quickly as possible. I get it from Heat Transfer Source. You can just buy it if you buy anything from them. You can add it to your cart, but really all it is just a sample piece of granite, and it just allows everything to cool a little bit faster. And I found for the cardstock, it will keep it from curling as bad, and then the HTV, it likes a cool peel, and I've just found that it also keeps it from bubbling at all. So again, both of these materials are a little bit more finicky than all of my other cutouts that I do, but it's just a matter of preference for color for me. And you can see I love those little bitty pieces of tape. What I'm doing here is I'm just making sure, and I just eyeball it, that it's in the middle, that there's the same amount of that outside on the outer edge. And then we're just going to put a piece of Teflon sheet on top, and then I will just let my AutoPress do its magic. Let's take that Teflon sheet off, and again, this is my cooling block that I use, and I don't spend a lot of time, but I just run it over it. You don't have to do that, and the white glitter that I'm using doesn't really need as much of a cool press. I'm doing this more just to help with the cardstock, to keep it from curling as much as I can, and then we'll just take these carrier sheets off. I know I talked about in my HT video, kidding about that I used to save those little bitty pieces of tape before I got my tape dispenser. And then I realized when I can buy a huge roll for, under $15 and it will last me, more than a season. And I do lots of cutouts, that it just wasn't worth that time. So let's line these back up. And then we're going to add that very last layer of gold. What I like to do with this, and one of the other reasons why I love having gold in the middle, white in the middle, is it really allows that top layer to pop. But for me, it also lets me visually do a once over and make sure, okay, did I get every little piece weeded out that I wanted to weed out? And so as I'm doing this, I'm kind of visually looking over that and making sure that I have everything. Like, for instance, sometimes that little grad cap, that piece won't be weeded out. And so I just kind of remember and just visually look at it. Another key you can do is to keep your Cricut project open. And as you're doing this, you can kind of refer back to that. These are ones that I've weeded many, many times, so I can mentally and visually see that. But if I'm weeding a cutout and pressing it for the first time, I will usually leave my Cricut project open and refer back to it to make sure that I got every little piece of that. So we're just going to go through. I'm going to finish these last little ones. I'm going to do the same 285 at 20 seconds with the Teflon sheet on top. And I'm immediately going to do that cooling block. If I can, look, I found a little piece of residual. And for this piece, the cooling block I found just kind of helps keep it from bubbling. I found that this particular HTV, it's a little bit easier. It likes it better if it's the top layer. And just so you know, I'll put a link for where I get it. I actually get it in bulk at Aviva in Dallas, but I actually first found it at Hobby Lobby. And so it's just the gold shimmer, kind of their brand. So if you're just making cutouts for yourself, it's very easy to find that way as well. So normally we would be completely done and our cutouts would be ready to either put away for prep season or to put on our mum. But as you can see, they are already starting to slightly curl from this thinner cardstock being under the heat. So we're going to go back to those extra cardstocks that we made, and we're just going to put them on there to kind of give this a little more security and keep it from curling up. So I use hot glue. That's what I've always used for my cutouts. I know some people have different types of adhesive glue, so I would say whatever you're used to working with when you're working with gluing any of your cardstock. Luckily, I only have to glue hot glue now that I use HTV every now and then. But what I usually do is I line it up, and because it's supposed to be, it will be the exact same, right? So I make sure it's all lined up, and then I'll kind of hold it on one end and I'll put a little hot glue in the middle, and then I'll just press down a little bit, and then that kind of secures it in place. And then I can go around with my fine tip hot glue here. As you can see, I'm adding a little bit of glue in there and press it together. And just remember, when you're doing this, and anytime you're working with cutouts, you'll want to use just a low temperature hot glue gun. I love using my fine tip because I can kind of get it in there in those layers really good. I don't know if you remember in my finishing touches video, I talked about one time I had made like this 4-layer cutout, and we went to go put it on the flower head, and we used our hot Ryobi glue gun that we used to secure the flowers, and we let it set, and we came back and the cutout had buckled. And those of you that make lots of cutouts know that having to redo a cutout is very, very sad. So I guess I learned from that. So hopefully you can learn from something that Rayanne and I have done, and we have learned. And we always, when we are applying any cutout either to the flower head or to the mum itself, we always make sure we use our low temperature hot glue gun. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to do each one of the kind of sets so that you can see them, is I kind of set them aside after I'm done with them and let them dry a little bit, and then I'll show you. I just kind of go back and check the edges a little bit. And again, if you want to use, if you're used to using glue adhesive, that's totally fine as well. I don't use much hot glue anymore on my cardstock and my cutouts, except for issues like this when it curls on me. And again, you can also, if you wanted to offset that, you could offset it. And so this was a little bit larger, and you don't have to worry about lining it up. I just, I like the look of this. Sometimes there is a, Creative Warehouse or Celebration Warehouse glitter cardstock. I talked about it in that glitter cardstock video, that but it's a little bit creamy, and so this has just been kind of my favorite look for my gold senior months. So let's go and check real quick. And again, the other thing is, this back layer, super cheap, right? Like 7 cents for that 8.5 by 11. So to me, that's just the better way to do it, because it's already pretty that way. But again, that would kind of just be preference. Looks like, see how that corner's kind of coming up. So I'll just go add just a tiny little bit of hot glue. And then looks like over here as well needs a tiny little bit more hot glue. Everything else looks pretty good. Let's check this one. This one looks pretty good. And so as you can see, these are laying much more flat. Let's hold this up. So here's your comparison, right? The one that's glued to the cardstock versus the one that's not. So I hope that this video gave you some ideas, not only gave you maybe some senior SVGs and cutouts that you could use, but in general gave you some ideas on working with cardstock that's thinner. For me, it's mainly gold, because this is the cardstock and shimmer HTV combination that I think goes the best with our mums, since we use all soft gold diamond dust. But it also comes into play sometimes with me for custom colors if I've chosen something that's a little bit thinner. So I think that's it for now, friends. I hope that you have fun with these senior SVGs, and I and Rayanne will talk to you very soon. Happy creating!